Yeah. Okay, so good evening, everyone. My name is Platon Issaias, and I would like to welcome you in the last session of today, the second day of the conference. We are a bit late, so let's start without any further delay. I'm incredibly happy and honored to moderating this session among very good friends and collaborators. The title of this panel is Sharing Experiences, Designing with Communities Across Europe, and we will discuss practices, pedagogies, and models of participation. What we are thinking and what we will try to explore is participatory protocols and models of community engagement in the intersection between architectural education and design practice, whatever this means, right? And we will invite everyone for a conversation that problematizes the role of the architect in singular or plural, and the organization of labor within both practice and academia, right, through specific examples. We want to also push a conversation towards rethinking new alliances that emerge in rethinking care, domesticity, collectivity, and equipments, in order to tackle structural inequalities and environmental injustice. So without, as I said, further delay, I would like to introduce Cristina Gamboa from Lacol. Cristina is a chartered architect and teacher. She studied at ECHAB and the University of Stuttgart. Cristina is co-founder of Lacol, where she was focused on researching participative approaches to design and developing cooperative housing and housing policies tested in ongoing projects. I think you will show us some of these today. Cristina currently teaches at the AA and ECHAB, and she has also taught previously as a visiting lecturer at the Royal College of Art in London. A few words about Lacol. Lacol is a cooperative of 14 architects established in 2009 in the neighborhood of Sants in Barcelona. They work to generate community infrastructures for the sustainability of life as a key tool for the eco-social transition through architecture to models of cooperativism and participation. Their collective work has been recognized and exhibited locally and internationally, including the Moira Gaming Prize, Women's Awards in 2021, the Venice Biennale of Architecture, the City of Barcelona Architectural Awards, among many others. Cristina, the virtual floor is yours.
So, thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you very much for the presentation, Platon. So let me also put the timer in order to adjust to the time. So, as also Platon said, we are organized as a non-profit workers' co-op established in 2014 as a cooperative, and after almost 5 years working as an association. And I think it's always important to put the focus here because I'm just a representative of the collective, but at the same time, also it's important to understand how the new practices and the new projects that we are in a way aiming for also ask for new forms of organization. No? And I think it's something that is totally interconnected. And another important thing is that we basically end our studies and starting our professional experience in the middle of the economic crisis in Spain, which we also argue more as a kind of a systemic crisis. So totally linked to the housing bubble and also based to different neoliberal policies. So we understood also how the architects and the profession were part of all these systems. So it was also an opportunity to redefine the role of the architect or thinking kind of new kind of opportunities. So since the first projects that we started to work with in the neighborhood where we have our space, we had the opportunity, when we understood it as a potential experiences, to redefine new protocols of urban transformation. And this is the area of Sans where we are established, where we work, a popular neighborhood with a strong history of cooperativism and social movements. And basically, this was the first experiences and kind of a school for us, where to realize how the processes, the time, the strategies, the collective work legitimize the citizenship and the different roles to be active in the transformation of the city. And this is a map that we generate for the Catalan Pavilion from the Venice Biennale, like showing how the community activities were kind of growing in the formal industrial premises. And basically, this was kind of the first real experience where we were involved as neighbors, as part of the community, which is also important to understand where we are positioned. And basically was the opportunity to arrive from the theory to the practice. So understanding that there were many collectives working in the idea that we can generate a cooperative neighborhood, the idea that in a moment of where the welfare state was dismantled, it was important to generate collective responses to the different individual needs. So basically, in Camballo, many projects arose and were organized, from health, food to housing and economical activities. But what is important is to understand that there is kind of a new protocol of management, but at the same time, there is a need of new protocols and new tools of governance of the city. So from these processes emerge, which is the first time that in Barcelona it's applied public cooperation, public cooperative community management following the citizenship heritage contract. That means that the community will manage by 50 years the area. And this is an example of the idea that working together, but also trying to understand which kind of new frameworks and regulations we need, we are able to maintain and to replicate certain kind of processes. And also in Camballo, as I was saying, it was kind of a school for us, was the first opportunity to also redefine new protocols of provision architecture, of the architectural practice, through understanding the tools, the skills, the people involved, the processes, from the design to construction and management. Just by this kind of a small intervention, reusing materials from the space just to connect inside the industrial formal place, the ground floor with the first one. And realizing how the potential of these spaces for the engagement and the interaction of the people. So after our kind of first step in Camballo, which I think it's something that it's still ongoing as a professional, personal, and collective relationship, we started to be involved in many projects with the municipalities, participatory process that were defining programs, kind of empowering of the neighbors, but in a certain moment we were kind of aware about kind of the limits of these processes, and basically we were feeling more confident, and we were thinking that the kind of processes that we really believe in, and in that sense that share our values, were the ones that the community is taking the control of the process. So, and also understanding it as a kind of process of emancipation, in the sense that allow to establish certain social transformation, social, economical, and political transformation. And in that sense, it's not in an autonomous form, so not totally kind of independently also from the government or from the administration, but leading these processes, taking the control and asking for these kind of new tools, as the example of Camballo. So that's why also Platon mentioned, after all this kind of organic process as evolving in the professional kind of field, we arrived to this kind of concept that we understand these community projects as certain infrastructures, following the idea that also in the historical moment of the beginning of the cooperativism, the cooperatives of consumers and the institutions that were emerging from the workers was kind of new institutions that organize the collectivity, the subjectivity, and this could be physical spaces, but also kind of legal and non-physical spaces. And basically, we understand that from those kind of projects, there is a possibility to manage in another parameters the life, also in terms of environmental, but also in terms of gender, race, kind of. And in that sense, that's why we also call how these infrastructures can be kind of a tool for this eco-social transition, something that in this kind of moment of social but also climate emergency is more needed than ever. So that's why we say that through architecture, cooperativism, because it's kind of the economical model that we believe, because we also understand that the right to the city, it's really in a battle with also how the capitalism is affecting it. So it's the framework that we understand that we can in a way gain certain kind of areas. That's why I wanted to introduce as example two initiatives that came also from Camballo and from the community, from this cooperative movement. One of them is Ateneus Cooperatius, which I translated as cooperative Ateneums. So basically, it's a project that wants to become a social economy incubator in the neighborhood of Sants. But what is more important that also is an idea that was presented to the municipality and also to the general Catalan government, and basically became again kind of a new partnership where Copolis became the first Ateneu in Barcelona, but is one of 8 that are in all the Catalan territory, with the idea that in every area, in every kind of context, the idea to how to can promote social economy, we can introduce the values, the experiences, the knowledge, in order to generate kind of new hubs and new kind of areas kind of protected from only kind of the ideas from capitalism and benefit. So the idea to put the people in the center, the planet, and all the other values. And basically also we were asked by the community with public funds to restore temporarily one of the blocks, following a participatory process with the people who were leading, but also introducing intercooperation in the construction with a cooperative of carpentry that is located nearby, and basically with also some kind of workshops to provide the different furniture and the management of the process. And here basically some photos of these temporary boxes that we designed to allocate with materials mainly with materials that we also find in the places to allocate the activity. Meanwhile, the municipality is kind of restoring one building for kind of the future former place for Coopolis. So this was kind of a space for the promotion of social economy. And the second kind of policies that we have been working really hard is the implementation of cooperative housing models in the city of Barcelona. And the first experience was La Borda, which is the project that I will present it, and it's in the screen. So it was a pioneer project developed. So the first building following this model built in a public land. And basically, we are in a city with 2% of public housing, with a strong pressure of the real estate market. So basically, we wanted to introduce, and it was also presented outside in one of the tables, a new model, non-speculative, and totally based with collective ownership. So this was kind of the pillars of the model, and we had been looking international case studies. But it was, again, this idea to introduce a model, trying to push for policies, but basically doing through specific case studies, working by the hand of a community which is kind of leading the process, which is a group of neighbors wanting to fulfill the needs of a stable, decent, and affordable housing, but in collaboration also with a group of cooperative, so again, a process of intercooperation with lawyers, with service designers, with communication professionals, with economists, to fulfill all the development. And basically, in this kind of diagram, we can see how also the participatory process within the architectural project is organized, which means that the architects, we are kind of in the last kind of level, we are in contact, we are always in communication with a group of representatives of the assembly, so the committee, architectural committee, which follows and also validates our process and decide which information, which decision will take by the General Assembly. So always a kind of a dialogue in between the assembly and us as a technicians. And basically, I think that also a process like this asks for tools that sometimes are not that used in architecture. So basically introduce surveys, tools to define the future user of the collective housing, several kind of workshops, dynamics, and methodologies that also ask for architectural response, so how the architecture and the solutions, so the way we organize the program, how we define the support as an open infrastructure following Bracken, it's also a way to organize kind of the levels of participation from the total control of the development through collective design process with some special election by the user, arriving to high level of appropriation of all the spaces. And basically, during this process, we have been discussion about the model of conviviality, about environmental goals, for example, because I think that this kind of projects also allow to redefine the ways that we inhabit the spaces, the way we relate each others, also which kind of rituals we can change. And all this has also an impact, for example, in sustainability, which is also something that the community was really, really aware about that. And basically to end some images of these spaces that are through time being more and more alive by the people who has the information through the process, and we also gave the tools and certain kind of workshops and pedagogies to how to use the infrastructure, how to use it during the year, for example, but then also they are through self-management, finishing the common areas and basically inhabiting and resolving the different needs in the building, from the ground floor and the common kitchen that it's after the door, to the multi-purpose room and the future laundry that you can see non-finished, arriving to the different outdoor spaces, the flats that are totally kind of unfinished and non-hierarchical, and it's totally used differently by each inhabitant, and arriving to all these kind of areas that, as I was saying, allows to implement new measures, actions, habits, and routines to fulfill the needs of care, to fulfill kind of the climate emergencies, and also how the prices of energy is affecting, and we can collectively in these projects decide of change certain things to save, for example, no? And the collective kitchen, they are implementing collective dinner 1 per week, also working with products of the surrounding, and starting to work around care protocols, which of course were really, really promoted during the COVID. No? And this is a photo from a kind of a school that the parents self-organized just to allow some of them to work, but also to allow to kids to play with others and to protect in a way the mental health, no? That they were suffering a lot with a strong lockdown measures in Spain. And I'm just out of time, so I just wanted to, this is the last slide, say that this was a project that we were working with the municipality, and now it's a policy of cooperative housing, and many projects with different collectives, different architects are emerging from that. And so that's things that we are interested on and we work to get. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think it was policy, not police. Yes.
Sorry.
Yeah,
It was from plural policy. Well, sorry.
that's all right. Great. I think we can take a couple of questions now, and then before moving to the next presenter. But then we can come back to Q&A at the end. I don't know if there are questions from the audience here.
I just speak super fast, sorry, so
That's all
maybe they need time.
Lucas?
Just thank you very much. It was a really exciting and fascinating presentation. I wanted to ask if, from what I understand, this is a case where there is a very good cooperation with the municipality, and also there is already some kind of a legal or institutional framework that has been established in order to allow for co-housing projects to take place. And I was wondering if there are similar experience that from your work with other municipalities, or something relevant that you may know where the municipality is not really into this kind of co-housing project, and what alternatives could be done in that case. I mean, it has to do with the role of the municipality in that kind of project. That's the essence of the question. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, I think it's always important to say that we started the project in 2012, and the first agreement to the leasehold, because this is on public land, as I was saying, but the first agreement was with the former political party, which was from the right party, and of course the current municipality of Barcelona and Comú has supported, and the replicability I think that has been possible because of, but we had the opportunity in the previous one just to start working as a pioneer example and as a kind of a testing, and that was because the legitimacy of the neighborhood and kind of the strong movements that in a way was kind of supporting to present the proposal to the municipality. So I think it was important to understand how the project was rooted in the neighborhood. So in order to be able to defend it in kind of a bit adverse political party. And then, of course, the municipality has supported a lot with many other policies, with 2 competitions and 1 agreement to replicate it. But we have been also working with municipalities that they are with different parties. And basically, I think it's always interesting to give them knowledge, legal frameworks, but also support to implement these policies. Because I think that basically this is what is sometimes lacking. That is this a kind of a policies that it's totally complementary to many other housing, social housing policies, and basically which is always some kind of attractive. This is that when in this, at least in La Borda, all the financial is kind of from cooperative or ethical finances. So the municipality can provide land or existing buildings, and they are able to produce social housing or affordable housing with I would say kind of a small effort, and that's something that maybe the people are or certain municipalities are interested. So we have been working, as I was saying, with different parties, and basically I think that to see that it's possible with current experiences, to see the interest of Barcelona, it's always helping, but basically giving them tools, also international experiences, and kind of basically kind of a contract, a set of regulations, and helping them allows the replicability. And nowadays are many towns and cities around Barcelona and also in rural areas that are implementing projects like this.
Thank you. I think there will be many more questions. I would suggest to move to the second presentation just to speed up a bit things. Cristina, it was fantastic. Thank you so much. James, are you there?
I am. Hello, Platon.
We cannot
Hi, everybody.
hear you.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? I am unmuted.
Yes, you are. Hi.
Okay,
How are you?
hi.
Let me briefly introduce you, and then I could the digital floor will become yours. So James Westcott is a writer and editor. He co-teaches a studio on material flows with focus on reuse at the Architectural Association with Odeline Doulière, and leads a seminar on ecological conservation. He was editor of Rem Koolhaas AMO books Countryside, a report from Tassen, and Elements of Architecture, again from Tassen and Marsillo, and last Project Japan, again from Tassen. He taught a seminar on the Anthropocene and a studio on the US-Mexico border at TU Delft, and his writings have appeared in AA Files, The Guardian, The New York Times, Salon, Open Democracy, and Alternates, among other places. James, we're very happy to have you with us tonight.
Great. Yeah, thank you so much for the invitation. And I really hope I can contribute something relevant. So I will share my screen. And I will go into presenter mode. And can you tell me if you see the full slide?
We can see your notes as well.
Ah. Okay. Let me try something different.
It's the usual problem.
They haven't solved it, right?
Exactly. It will never be resolved. No, only after COVID.
Oh, okay.
Try again.
I think I know what to do. You'll see just a second. Okay, and now?
Yes, now we can see the slide. We cannot see your notes. That's perfect.
Okay, good. Yeah. All right. So yeah, I teach a studio on material reuse at the AA, as Platon said, and yeah, I'm just going to give a very basic introduction to the kinds of issues we face and the work we focus on, which is typically work on systems or the design of systems rather than aesthetic design, let's say. So to begin, actually, that's my last slide. Flick back to the beginning, apologies. You get a little preview of what's coming. Okay, so resource extraction is the elephant in the room when it comes to the climate and ecological crisis. It's one of the main causes not only of habitat loss and deforestation, but also of the growth economy that drives carbon emissions. You can see here the precipitous rise of global resource extraction, which has doubled only in the past 25 years. And much of those extracted resources, of course, are used for the construction industry, which is responsible for 5% of energy emissions and 10% of total emissions, which is 5 times higher than the 2% contributed by aviation. Meanwhile, construction and demolition waste decreased by 30% between 1998 and 2012, which you would think is something to celebrate. But over the same period, the reuse of salvage materials declined by 64%. So this might be explained by the increasing efficiency of recycling systems, which explains both the reduction in the salvage of construction and demolition waste and the decrease in landfilling, because basically it's much easier to recycle something than it is to reuse it. So I want to suggest a first principle that we might bring to architecture now, In the same way that if you were going to buy a new car today, or even a second-hand one, you would most likely look at an electric car as a first option. It may not always be viable, but you would at least analyze the price and your needs. You may even be willing to pay slightly more for it. So I want to suggest that it should be the same with second-hand salvaged building materials for architects, contractors, and developers. Used materials should be the first thing we look at when thinking about designing and building. But this requires both a change in psychology and a change in economic and regulatory frameworks. The barriers to the understanding, acceptance, and integration of reused materials are quite high, even in contexts that theoretically welcome and encourage reuse. In the 102 pages of the recent UK Architects Declare Emergency document, reuse is mentioned only 11 times, and each of these mentions is quite brief. And there's the sad statistic at the beginning that only 1% of building elements are reused in Northwestern Europe. Reuse appears quite often in this triumvirate of waste reduction strategies, whereas it should really be a category on its own because it's fundamentally different to recycling and reduction. The document does make a very coherent statement, and it's kind of exactly what we look at in Diploma 18 at the Architecture Association, especially this year. The need for pre-demolition audits and material inventories to be a kind of mandatory or at least normal part of the construction process. And then you consider all the logistical repercussions of that. It also mentions the need to consider reuse at the end of a building's life. But the document kind of remains silent on how to salvage materials and how to incorporate them in new buildings. So with students from the AA in London, we visited a recycling plant in London, Power Day, which deals exclusively with construction and demolition waste. This was a strange place to begin a studio on reuse, but in a way we went there to get familiar with our enemy, recycling, and to really see its fundamental differences from reuse. Recycling and reuse are often bundled together in circular economy documents and design strategies. The terms are conflated and used interchangeably, whereas in fact they could not be more different. We're quite familiar with the geographical and borderline colonial issues involved in recycling and with the greenwashing associated with it, but perhaps we're not so aware that the majority of material earmarked for recycling actually goes to incineration or waste to energy plants. And this in turn is labeled a renewable energy source, the burning of trash. Semantic traps and propaganda awaits us everywhere. And whereas reuse does not break down original forms, but instead repairs and rejuvenates them, recycling might more accurately be termed downcycling. Materials are crushed or shredded, eventually to be melted down, all of which is an incredibly energy-intensive process. Never mind the destruction of the energy that was invested in the beginning to produce a particular form. So in a nutshell, a practice of reuse seeks to reuse a brick as a brick, whereas recycling would crush the brick into aggregate and use it for infill or ballast in a road. Reuse is about specific forms, recycling is about materials and mass. Power Day has several large sites across London and they pride themselves on 100% diversion from landfill. They made the switch from landfilling construction and demolition waste in 2007, when landfill taxes became so high that it became economical to switch completely to recycling. By 2030, there will be no more landfill space in the south of England for anything. Construction and demolition waste today doesn't really go to landfill anymore, in any case. And yet, you know, contractors and developers often boast that they're doing 100% diversion from landfill. So this is the first step of recycling construction and demolition waste. It's sorting, basically. A massive warehouse-sized single machine separates out materials by churning them, sieving them, shaking them, blowing them, and using magnets. The process is overseen by a handful of workers, most of whom are from Poland. We were told by the site supervisor that many of them work for maybe 10 years at Power Day and accumulate enough money to retire when they go back home. This is the huge waste pile at the end of the warehouse, and it's fed into a machine over here. It's an incredibly energy intensive work using 6 million kilowatt hours of electricity per year. In the end, one of the main products is so-called fines, somewhere between dust and granules, almost indecipherable. Here, though, it's mixed with polystyrene balls that are light enough to get sucked up and mixed in with the material. Surely an impossible mixture to separate out any further, but it does make good fuel for incinerators. Much of the material is compressed into bales, which forms its own disturbing stratigraphy, a cross-section of the construction and demolition industry, which in turn is then wrapped in plastic, ready to be loaded onto trucks. 30 a week go to waste-to-energy incineration plants in Holland, 10 a week to Germany. Waste-to-energy plants in the UK aren't yet equipped to take construction and demolition waste, only household and commercial waste. Certain characteristics of the landfill are still present at the recycling plant. Recycling might be called the new landfill. What I mean by this is that it's become the default option, and it's also proving to be ecologically and systemically damaging. Contrast the process of demolition and recycling with dismantling and reclamation, which is a very careful and time-consuming process, mostly done by human hands at the point of extraction. This is the warehouse of Rotor DC in Brussels, a collective dedicated to salvaging and selling secondhand materials. Whereas the atmosphere in the recycling plant was oppressive, smelly, incredibly loud, not exactly chaos, but certainly destructive and intimidating. In a facility dedicated to reuse, order, calm, and rejuvenation are the prevailing qualities. And of course, it takes great care to clean and repair salvaged materials to get them ready for market. This is perhaps the biggest bottleneck in the process and the biggest driver of cost, but it's a skilled form of labor that requires great dedication. This is Rotor's showroom, where selected salvaged and cleaned items are sold, kind of IKEA of reused materials. But it's not like we can all just decide to start practicing material reuse, because ultimately used materials are nearly always more expensive than brand new ones. And that's because of the incredible amount of time and labor that goes into the salvage, repair, storage, inventory, and marketing of them. But as we see with other industries, profitability is only a function of the subsidies, tax breaks, and externalities that are involved in an industry. So it may only take a careful regime of incentives, subsidies, and changes in laws to suddenly facilitate reuse. So these are the bottlenecks of reuse in terms of a process. It's a long list of fiendishly difficult problems. And this is what Rotor and Diploma 18 students at the AA spend most of their time trying to solve. So first of all, demolition contractors must complete their work in a fixed window of time, otherwise they face a cash penalty. So there's no incentive for them to consult with material experts to carefully assess and extract the value and reuse potential of the building's materials. And there's every incentive to rip everything down as fast as possible. So almost at the very first hurdle, the reuse economy is made very difficult by an entrenched economic practice in the building industry. Simply legislating a new rule that every demolition project must factor in, say, 2 weeks for a salvage audit would have a revolutionary impact on the reuse economy. Secondly, recycling is the default option for construction and demolition waste in the UK. Processes have become more efficient and cheaper, and it carries with it a lot of greenwashing potential. Contractors and developers can boast almost 100% reclamation without mentioning that 99% of that is going to recycling, where it's crushed or the material is crushed or incinerated. Some regulations dictate that demolished material must be reclassified on site as waste, and this makes it very difficult to reclassify it later as a marketable product. Let's say that a window of time is forced open for careful salvage before a building comes down. Either the demolition contractor or a separate salvager must be sufficiently trained in the careful removal of materials without breaking them. Then we move to the next step in the chain, finding a salvage yard willing to accept or consign the material and to pay for its storage until it's sold. When profit margins are so thin, the additional transport typically required for salvage and reuse can quickly tip the project into uneconomical territory, reinforcing again the case for demolition. Repair and rejuvenation of salvage materials is quite skilled and very labor-intensive process, which also drives up the cost in comparison with the mechanized processes that allow new materials to remain cheap. Scarcity of affordable land within close proximities to cities means that salvage yards are typically located out in the countryside, where they can afford plots big enough to store these huge amounts of material. Then they have the responsibility of inventorizing what they've got, and a market must be created for the material. We'll see a couple of efforts at this in a minute. As well as these commercial and economic and legal bottlenecks, psychology is a major issue with secondhand materials. There's the perception that new materials are inherently superior. Patina or weathering have a vast range of different meanings depending on social context, which is a kind of minefield to navigate. Regulations is another bottleneck. There's ambiguity over the relevance of CE markings for secondhand materials. While the lack of CE marking should never prevent their actual use legally, it does make contractors and insurance hesitant and nervous about using and approving them. Then the installation of secondhand material in a building might require more skills, might be more complicated than an off-the-shelf option. And finally, there's the bottleneck of scalability. In capitalism, there's always the imperative to scale up, but the reuse economy has certain inbuilt characteristics that make it very difficult to mimic normal growth-oriented economics. This is also a part of the attraction of reuse. It has unique qualities that make it inherently more relational than normal capitalist dynamics. So this is one effort by Royo to document the large and relatively informal practice of salvage that already exists. The classical practice of using spolia, building materials from ruins elsewhere, is in new buildings, is scrambled in an anagram, and the practice is reimagined completely. Opalis is a website, a directory of the hundreds of small businesses practicing salvage already. With students, hundreds of sites have been documented across Belgium, Holland, France, the UK, and further afield too. The stated goal is to facilitate the reuse of materials in construction and renovation projects simply by pointing out where such materials are already available. The goal is to honor and collect the work already being done for generations in the reuse industry, not to redefine it or place new meanings on it. Most salvage operators do not consider themselves part of the circular economy. Neither is the goal to create any kind of new accreditation system or industry standards, which would place more burdens on an industry where the margins are already very thin. So here are a few examples of salvage yards that were documented for the Opalis project. You can see on the map here that salvage yards are typically on the outskirts of cities where land is cheaper. Opalis documents the basic details of each business and photographs it. Here, students from the AA did the same thing for salvage yards across the UK. This one, Frome Reclamation, specializes in bricks, natural stone, wooden floors, and so on. Students were sent as scouts to photograph these places. Last year, thanks to the pandemic, students were scattered more widely, so we got to see reuse practices around the world. In Casablanca, there are entire souks dedicated to salvaged building materials where each arch has a different owner and a different speciality. In Dubai, as one might expect, the trade is more oriented towards surplus building materials from new build projects rather than secondhand or antique materials. So you see brand new materials on the left and scaffolding on the right. In China, reclamation and rehabilitation of materials was an ancient practice passed down from master to student, and there are still some remnants of that practice, though it is fading. So reclamation yards, at least in the UK, have a unique atmosphere. They're almost abandoned. There's a kind of romance to them, a sense of massive unfulfilled potential. The materials are charged with a complicated aura. They almost have a negative value, but at the same time, they contain the history of where they're from and the anxiety of their uncertain future. This is an example of the kind of spaces they require. Opalis is not the only effort that's been made to gather all these salvage yards. SalvaWeb has been doing it for many years already. Rotor DC is a spin-off company that sells reclaimed materials directly online. That makes it easier to access than these very out-of-the-way salvage yards. And a new aura is conferred upon these materials thanks to the platform that they're on. This is also, they've also launched a kind of raw site where material resellers or demolition contractors can post items for sale directly, kind of like a Craigslist for secondhand materials. So in deployment 18, we typically look at the framework for reuse and how we can facilitate it, how we can break through those bottlenecks that I listed earlier. Typically, we look systemically more than we look at design. You don't necessarily have to notice reuse, and you don't have to flaunt secondhand materials. So it's not so much design problems that need to be solved as much as regulatory, logistical, and economical ones. This is a prime example cited by one of our students, Ellie Munn, last year, of how the demolition or site preparation phase of a project is completely ignored by REBA protocols. And a completely new schedule needs to be added to cover best practice for demolition, deconstruction, and salvage. So Ellie came up with a detailed scheme for what this process could be. And it starts with pre-demolition audits and agreements, culminating in unbuilding and consignment of the materials that are saved. Since space and time apply so much pressure to the reuse economy, Ellie proposed a new type of facility. We've probably heard of construction consolidation centers, sites where materials can be stored fairly locally to big construction projects in cities. The same should apply in reverse for deconstructed buildings. So you would have deconstruction consolidation centers dotted around London. And they could even become community hubs, acting in the same way as IKEA or DIY stores, popularizing and facilitating the process of reuse by solving the problem of the space needed for the storage of materials. London Unbuilding would then work with existing salvage yards and coordinate the eventual delivery and consignment of fresh building stock. Another one of our students, Nikitas Papadopoulos, looked at the intersection between material use and social enterprises. At Glasgow Wood Recycling, most of the staff are being rehabilitated, trained, or reintegrated into society after various difficulties in their lives. GWR talks about ending social isolation through woodworking schemes, bringing about social benefit as a direct result of the slow and careful work needed for the restoration and preparation of used materials. Adam Hills runs a reuse practice in London called Retruvius. Material reuse can bridge experts like him and workers who are new to the world, like those at Glasgow Wood Recycling. He summarized for us the unique conundrum and opportunity of reuse. Salvaging material is not scalable because to process more material, you will require increased human and spatial resources. So there's kind of a cap on the growth of Retruvius. This is on the Harrow Road in London, which is quite an area with low property value. And basically the only reason they were able to launch and sustain this business for 25, 30 years is because they were able to buy this property back in the late 90s. So they managed to reduce their overhead, and that's why reuse is sustainable for them. But Adam goes on, it is humanly scalable. Expertise can be transferred, more stakeholders can be solicited, and in this way, a network can be propagated. So will reuse in its current scale or even slightly scaled up in some way through networks make a dent in the global amount of material extraction and demand? The answer is no, of course not, but we're discovering that carbon reduction and waste reduction are almost happy byproducts, an alibi for a practice that's inherently more relational and community driven. And you don't have to wait for those social benefits or abstract them on a spreadsheet, they're imminent with the work. So to conclude, with diversion from landfill almost a prerequisite in Northern Europe already, and not so much to boast about, the goal in the future could be 100% diversion from recycling, with materials instead channeled towards a reuse economy. And if that's a bit hyperbolic, changes in the law and the economy could at least give the chance for all material in a doomed building to be assessed for its reuse potential. And the cascading consequences in the reuse economy and in communities would be powerful indeed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, James. This was fantastic. I think the issues that you discussed, the relation between new forms of practice and the future of construction in the era of climate emergency, it's something that we should come back in the conversation, and how these relate with participation and participatory protocols across multiple levels of governance in the economy. I think it's really important to come back. Just to speed up a bit the process, I would just skip the questions for now, and I will pass the mic to Tiago, Mota, Saraiva. Tiago is an architect, urbanist, and planner with a degree in architecture and specialization in architecture, territory, and memory. Since 1995, he has worked in several offices in Lisbon, Rome, and Vicenza, and he has been invited assistant professor in Moderna and Lisbon, right? He is a member of the Architects National Association since 2001, where he has been part of the National Executive Board, and he also served as a national treasurer. He's a member of the organizing committee of the Portuguese National Architecture Year and curator, in between others, of the International Celebration of Cities competition organized within the UIA. He was the Portuguese delegate to the International Union of Architects Congress of 2005 in Istanbul, Turkey. And currently he's managing partner of Ateliermob, head of working with the 99% co-op, a board member of SOU Largo Resistencias co-op, and board member for the European Association of Recreators and Placemaking Europe leader. He's invited professor at the Architectural Faculty of Lisbon's University and elected councillor in the General Council in Lisbon. So, Tiago, welcome.
Well, is it on? Okay. Hello, everyone. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting and for all the fantastic organization that we have seen today and the day before. Well, I must start by saying today we saw a lot of great projects and a lot of connections with participation and projects being modeled. And I do feel, I was thinking about it, and I do feel I'm bringing you the bad example. So, because I will only show you one project, which is in Quinta do Ferro. It's in the Lisbon city center, but it's also it's the bad example, mostly because, as you will see, when I say we, it's the participatory process is not winning. Well, this is Quinta do Ferro. It's it's in the, I must say, it's more or less in the center of the city of Lisbon, but it's in the mix of two kinds of development. So it has been, it was a neighborhood left in between in between two developments. So now it's this, as you see it. So you have huge buildings up on your top right side of the image, and then you have another street on the left part, and you have in between these constructions. And with these streets, and you can. This is something that we have been studying for some time. The idea of this urbanism and the idea of how does it express itself in the territory. So, in a certain way, how, for example, public policies can provoke this urbanism. This is a data that I have only 2 weeks. I had only 2 weeks ago. In this neighborhood of Quinta do Ferro, there were 58 building permits that were asked in the last 8 years, and 8 were approved. So we have a lot of buildings waiting like this. Although this area, it's an area that it's quite, well, how could I say it? It's now an area that the investors are always trying to get, because it has cheap prices with these ruins, and it's an area that it's in the city center. So the speculation, it's here. Here you can see some of the images. For example, here you can see someone that does not have tap water at her house, and she's taking it from that tap, that public tap, and you have this idea of the garbage that is thrown to this area, and that the garbage it's not the garbage bus or that does not pass through, so that it does not take it out from here. And then you have a participatory process that started like that. It happened like this. One day someone knocked at our door, saying that he has seen us in a TV documentary, which is José Rosa, that is in the middle with the paper, And José said, I have a small plot that my father gave to me. I have a small plot in Quinta do Ferro, and I don't know what to do. Am I going to sell it, or do you think we can do something? And in fact, we didn't know much on Quinta do Ferro, but we could realize that it was really an interesting neighborhood, because you have like a kind of a rare situation of connection in between tenants and landowners. Some landowners were also living, but which provides short rent, so small rent. Not so the rents here, even with this started in 2014. Then the prices started to rise all over the city, and but the rents here stopped in a little bit, and also it made that a lot of people moved here. So this is an area that is in expansion demographically, not construction. But we started in 2014-15, we started a participatory process with the support of the local development of the municipality. The idea was there were lots of projects before, lots of projects of different master plans, different architects that tried, and they were all rejected, either for the people there, either for the municipality. But the idea is trying to do something in a collaborative way. So we started conventionally inquiries. We started by the first inquiry, we published all over the neighborhood, we published the results, which were quite normal results: leisure spaces for all, building renewal, green areas, one public square, one kindergarten, accessibility, walkways. Urban gardening, it's quite funny because in our first proposals, we set spaces for urban gardening, but at a certain point we understood that no one wanted really to follow up the idea of urban gardening. So it was a thing that came out, that people think it was good, but no one really wanted to do urban gardening. So it was left throughout the discussions we had. And I'm going to pass through it. So this is several discussions that we had. This is the architect of our team, Carolina, worried about the urban gardening. I remember this. I took the picture. She was very worried about what to do with the urban gardening. Well, and then this is the studies we did. There was a kind of idea that mostly the neighborhood was made of public property, but in fact, for example, public property was mostly the streets, as you see here. But then also what was in ruins, what was not, and we did. Well, this is the final plan that was approved. I'm stepping a lot of paces, but this is the final plan with public buildings, with low rents, that we tried to engage the municipality. We had a lot of meetings with different public administrations areas from the municipality, and this was all supported in the beginning from the municipality by the local development. And the main thing, it's a square at your left, a square and this public housing, and then to produce a very chirurgical intervention in the city, in the center of the area. This is the model. This run, and this is the one that you can most comprehensive. The lightest one are the new buildings. But then from 2017 to 2020, so when we moved to urbanism, and not only for local development, we started to try to get a connection with urbanism, because this was a proposal of a master plan that was participated and that was agreed with the people. There we stand like this. This is the goods. It's the same newspaper with two news. One in 2017, which is said Quinta do Ferro will reborn and set its story in drawings. It was our time of believing. And then 2020, Quinta do Ferro wants to reborn, but from municipality only silence. In fact, it was not like that, because we had a very tough meeting with the municipality, where with a high administration of the municipality, where they just said, the problem of Quinta do Ferro will only be solved if we have a big owner of the land, and then we can cooperate with him so that we can start to solve the problems of the urbanity here. And that's what totally the opposite what we wanted. We want to keep, because this was mostly working class ownership. It was, and also tenants. So it was really, and the thing was that how can we do this master plan without gentrifying, and also gentrifying owners, landlords, you know, that was our first issue from the beginning. Well, in 2020, with the COVID issue, this neighborhood started to be very aggressive. We have a lot of problems with the disease. We have a lot of news about that. This is a documentary that was on TV, on the main TV, on the public TV, which call attention to the situation at Quinta do Ferro. As you see, the houses were in a very bad situation. What did it happen? What was the reaction from the urbanism? Was totally the opposite we wanted to. So we didn't have time, or we had at that time a new counselor of urbanism, and he said, no, it's unbearable to have this situation here in Lisbon. We will take care of it. And the idea of taking care is that, well, he didn't went with us to the space, to the neighborhood. He at least, I don't know if he has been there once at least. And he said, no, we are going to start to relocate people that are living there and put them in new buildings, which is okay. Well, which is something that we didn't go against it, because there were really situations really heavy, really that people have to be relocated, have to have proper houses. But and he started also to make pressure with land owners to sell. So he started to tell them that they have to close all the houses that had no conditions. They have to, and he started also a process of, it's not suing, it's billing about all the things they were not providing. So you have, for example, one example that of someone that has a rent of €2.35, I think, getting a bill of €700 just because of closing the windows. And right now, what is happening is that people mostly that started the project, landlords that started the project with us, are trying to, well, they mostly try to sell their houses with low prices. So we have more and more funds getting in this area. So this is one of the letters from the municipality pressuring landlords to go out of these neighborhoods. And thank you very much. Sorry, it's not a very good story, but we're still fighting.
Thank you very much, Tiago. I think we should come back to this issue of failure. I think we kind of touched upon it in the previous session, or the limits of success, or what is a success or a failure in the context of or in the framework of participatory design processes. I think we should return to this. It's a very fascinating thing, and thank you for you did something very courageous. You said we failed, which is fine. I mean, mostly we failed basically anyway. So I think we should have a conversation about failure as well. I think again, being cautious of time, I would we should move directly to Raul and Tonet from Arquitectos de Cabecera. Arquitectos de Cabecera is a Barcelona-based collective that inquires in community-led urban processes through architecture pedagogy as a tool for social transformation. Focusing on collective housing and collaborative practices, AC addresses the existing city by questioning the role of architecture amid an economic, social, and disciplinary crisis. AC has been recognized nationally and internationally, including the City of Barcelona Architectural Award in 2015 In 2017, nomination for the Mies van der Rohe Awards, and a commendation in the 2021 Innovation in Architectural Education Award by the UIA. They have exhibits in many places, among them in the Spanish Pavilion, in the Venice Biennale, at the CCCB in Barcelona, and in Medellin in 2015. Very briefly, I mean, there will be two speakers from the group. Raul is with us today, and Tonet is connecting via Zoom. The rest of the group is in Bilbao, concluding a week of participatory experiments and processes with a punk group playing in the next hour or so. I think there will be food as well, but the centerpiece is a really hardcore punk band playing from members of the group, which is also interesting. Anyway, Raul is a practicing architect, educator, and researcher. He studied architecture in ETSAB and in Mendrisio, after which he graduated from the AA. He's currently a PhD candidate at the Royal College of Art in London, inquiring into community architectures framed by social movements and collaborative practices. Apart from being a member of Arquitectos de Cabecera, he is also a practicing architect himself. And Tonet, who you won't see with us, but you will see soon from via Zoom. He's also an architect and urban planner. He teaches at ETSAB and the URL Schools of Architecture of Barcelona. And since 2001, his work has been dedicated to social housing, urban regeneration, and local development. He was previously responsible for the Plan de Barris, the neighborhood plans in Barcelona, and he led the Center for Social Innovation in the municipality of Barcelona as an advisor to the mayor's office. Raul, you can start. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the invitation and the opportunity to share our work today. So I come from Arquitectos de Cabecera, which could be translated something as community architects or GB architects. We are an architectural pedagogy that wants to have an impact beyond the School of Architecture, or an association that actually teaches in the School of Architecture of Barcelona. The members of the association, we are 12 people, come from 4 different backgrounds, which are academia, professional practice, social movements, and administration, policy making, which I think this gives us a very transversal approach to architecture problems. Our story starts at this moment, and I think it's no coincidence that it's a similar starting point as Cristina's lecture, 2008 economic crisis, which soon turned into a social and political one. So if this happened in 2011, in 2013, the School of Architecture stopped, and we questioned the role of architects in society and the role of how we were being taught as a student at that time, because we believe that on the one hand, the tools, the disciplinary tools that made Barcelona famous in the 90s with the Olympic transformations and were so much celebrated, were not able to respond to a social crisis that we were living at that time. And on the other hand, academia, the School of Architecture, was completely disconnected from the real problems of the city. So we did workshop for 2 weeks, which aimed to bring closer the figure of the architect to the citizen, and this ran across the school. We were one of the studios participating, and what we did was to go back again to the city center, the place that we had been developing as studio design, but do it with another look, actually trying to get inside the houses and understanding that if we want to improve our cities, the domestic space is what conforms the vast majority, actually, of the built space in the cities. So look at the city and look at buildings and architecture differently. Try to get inside each of the windows that we can see in this image, which actually was trying to overcome this slogan from the 90s, which was Barcelona Get Pretty. And this was a public campaign to embellish the city, which had a positive impact, but we claimed that this was actually not enough, that we should improve actually the domestic space and what we see as domestic and what we see as urban space, and actually interrelated. So in this case, for example, a house that is right in front of the most touristic spot of the city, in front of Magba, is influenced, in this case negatively, by that condition. So how do we look at the city actually was to shift from looking at its morphology as architects and give the same importance to the social fabric. So start talking to dwellers, and as we learned from these photographs of Huang Qinjun, which is a Chinese photographer, he takes pictures of dwellers in front of their houses with all the furniture in them. So he questions two things. On the one hand, is an empty house still a house? I mean, as architects, can we look at homes as empty spaces? And secondly, if we want to intervene as architects in one space, we should understand it in relation to dwellers and in relation to modes of inhabitation in this case. So that's how we looked at spaces, but like interestingly, I think what we did was to translate this approach that comes from social sciences to architecture through drawing, through representing. So the first step of our methodology always starts with drawing a cartography of what we find in that place. We claim that architects are fundamental agents in city transformation, but we also claim that we cannot do it by ourselves. So we always try to cooperate with the administration in its very different forms and with local communities in its very different forms as well, which can be like associations, it can be cooperatives, it can be social groups, it can be also sometimes private stakeholders. So when we arrive to a neighborhood to work in, we always have a look from the point of view of the people who are working there. We understand that as architects, we will never be the first one to operate in a place, and I think that's something all the presenters of these days are sharing. So in this case, Tony Marzo, which is the guy with the pink shirt, is the head of the neighborhood association and is leading the studio throughout the neighborhood of Safarejos in Santa Coloma. So that's one way to approach citizens. The second one is if they come to us. And in this case, that was a free architecture attention office that we set in 2015 in Barcelona, just aiming to offer architecture as a free social service that we claim that should happen. And Tonet will refer to these slides later on. Or in this case, for example, setting temporary the office in a neighborhood space, in a civic space, as could be the same building that we are in for a summer workshop for a month. So I'm gonna explain now what does this deal to in couple projects, and then Tonet will retake it from there with two other projects as well. In this case, is the story of a failure, even though I didn't frame it like that. That was not the idea. In any case, Sarah, a French citizen, came to the Citizen Attention Office that I mentioned before in 2015, telling us that there was this house called Lancaster or Guernica, that it was squatted by a community of people who had problems for living there, actually. And whereas squads are often seen as stereotyped, in this case, we saw a very diverse group of people whose common problem was the lack of affordable housing. So we started developing a cartography of the building. So we entered in each of these dwellings that you see in the image. The ones that are blank are simply neighbors that didn't want to collaborate with the project, and this was totally fine. Asking them, or simply saying them, we are architects, we have a technical knowledge that can help you with the problems that you have in your building. If you want to be part of the project, you're welcome, otherwise just have a nice day, right? So we started again doing the cartography and visiting the place with neighbors, and we did a technical report of the problems of the building in that case. And the strategy, because we had no funding to intervene there, was to set a number of micro projects. So develop a number of small interventions that dwellers could take care by themselves, defining like the technical issues as well as budget and material definition. So the idea was that they could develop that over time. But this was not only a morphological cartography, it was also a social cartography, meaning that we knew the same section that you saw on the building, we did it on dwellers. And we knew their construction skills and who had more time or less and who knew to do what and who was eager to show others how to do that. So the idea is that they would develop this project over time and actually be able to refurbish the building by themselves with our support as technicians. And during those days, this was in 2015, one of the first interventions took place, and it was to open a window in the ground floor to create the first community space where they could join. But this actually is a story of a failure, because at the end of the day, neighbors were relocated in public housing spaces, and the building was demolished. So the project that aimed to be a community-led project actually didn't work, and now there's an empty plot in the center of the city. The second one has to do with heritage. On the right-hand side, you will see like a green square. This is Can Seixanta, which is a very important building in the city because it represents the old typology of industrial building in Barcelona. The center was a productive space, and then in the perimeter, it had housing blocks. So they came again, coming to the Citizen Attention Office, telling that they were about to be evicted because a new real estate international operator had bought the building and was about to demolish it to create luxury rental apartments for tourism. So there were two problems here. The first one, the disappearance of a heritage building, not listed. Secondly, gentrifying even more the center of Barcelona. So again, the methodology was the same, do a cartography, do a report on the actually physical problems of the building. And actually that's the key moment in which all dwellers met, and this building was housing a number of associations which had a different impact, both at a social level, because it's a very complicated neighborhood, and also internationally. For example, there was a studio working with photography and daguerreotypes. There was another one proposing international exhibitions, but there was also someone working with integrating kids from minorities into the neighborhood through activities after school. So these are all the activities that were performed at different scales. And what we aim to do is a short-term project, which was to make visible what was going on there. And that's a crucial part, I think, of grassroots support movements. And then on the other hand, to start conversations with the municipality, and since we couldn't do anything here because it escaped the discipline of architecture, actually ask the municipality to intervene. So these are images of the of an exhibition that we said making visible all the production that was done at that time, which was not industrial anymore but cultural, and then all publicity. So try to join as many people as possible into the process. And the good news happened a year after, when the municipality actually bought the building, and now it's in a process of turning it into a civic center. Not only that, but the interesting bit was like 28 of these old factories that no one cared about were listed thanks to this campaign. And I have to say that Arquitectos de Cabecera was only one of the associations participating in this process. And this included other housing cooperatives, for example, and a lot of social associations. So when we were claiming at the beginning, can we as academia have an impact in the city? Actually, I think this project is a good ending story for us. I cannot shift anymore. Okay, good. So now Tonet will take it from here.
Hello, do you listen to me? Thank you. Well, yes, I took the control. Sorry, Raul. Thank you very much for inviting me. Well, if Can Seixanta is a good example to explain how participatory design can activate not only the protection of the architectural and cultural heritage, but can also boost the recovery of social heritage and to help to focus the interest of the society and the council on buildings that were supposed to be simply absorbed by private business as usual projects. There's another question, right? Which is about what happens when there isn't a community already inhabiting this space. And this is the case of La Escocesa, which is again in a green rectangle, which is a 19th century textile factory of Poblenou, the old industrial district of the city. A big urban transformation plan of the area has been developing since the end of the 90s to substitute the traditional manufacturing activities with new added value activities such as AT, knowledge, creativity functions, right? All these the things that are being told in all cities. Nevertheless, the urban plans protect some of the pre-existing buildings such as La Escocesa as architectural heritage, but emptying them from their functions. And those buildings that are abandoned soon start to degrade really fast. The Escocesa factory is divided in several buildings, so it's a complex which can show us how reusing the spaces, even with very few economic resources, can save the spaces and the buildings. But waiting all the time required for official procedures can be fatal, as we will see. And maybe, and that's a question, maybe all these official procedures and making things become fatal is because it is meant to be this way. I'll try to explain it, right? First, community of artists would squat the building in better conditions, which is what you're seeing in the picture, with the permission of the owner, which is the council, and later decided to expand their activities to the neighboring building. At this point, Arquitectos de Cabecera got involved with this idea, right? And we did through a procedure of first a workshop, which is not only a festival or a work with grassroots movements, but it's also a way to make the community know each other, to think about the possibilities of the space, right? Subsequently, we started recovering the space with some of the new users. So we understand that it's important that the users are already at the very beginning of the project, right? And we started to do a very simple transformation from recovering the windows, creating new windows from wood and reused polycarbonate, creating new doors also from reused materials, cleaning the space. As you can see, right? Here's again one of these windows made of polycarbonate and reused materials. And finally, with bearing props and wooden boards that were donated from a museum, we could create the subdivisions, right, in a project that would start to be inhabited in short time, right? More images, so you can see more or less how the space looks, right, and how it's working. And we did all this with not much economic means, as you can see, 48 euros per square meter. And of course, it doesn't want to be a finished project. But guess what happened to another of the buildings of the complex that was supposed to be the first completely rehabilitated by the council, right? It just collapsed, right? So one of our goals is to work against program decay, claim against administrative mismanagement, but also learning to be very humble as architects to become much more useful agents for neighbors. So maybe we produce less beautiful projects, but projects that are able to make buildings hold. Another and final example, which is a current project, and though it is in an initial phase, we think it is an interesting example as how we work in Arquitectos de Cabecera. Talking about this neighborhood called Las Casetas del Maresma, close to the previous project, 4 blocks of very humble houses that were supposed to be demolished during many years, and that meant a lot of problems, as we have seen in Tiago's presentation on Quinta do Ferro. How we work with them? Well, of course, from the start, we work with the community, but working with different people of the community, creating projects that apply to needs of different users and that are many times contradictory, right? We pay attention both to the community and to the user at the same time. And we start through small projects that recognize the daily reality and the main needs of the people, but we also ask each project to become much more structural in terms of being able to be applied in the whole neighborhood, right? As you can see in the image. Right? So we end up having like different ideas of how these houses can evolve instead of being teared down to create new buildings, right? And even creating very ambitious projects. So at the same time, the small projects that fulfill each of the users' needs, plus a project for the community to re-understand the neighborhood. And this ends up with this idea of a technical support office for housing refurbishment and energetic improvement that is open to all the neighbors, where we can do some assistance to these people that cannot afford, let's say, a formal architect, to get support to reach public help and subsidies for reinforcement through project documentation. So as a conclusion, Arquitectos de Cabecera is academia, as Raul has said, is association, is practice, is collective and community, but above all is understanding the role of the architect and the project within the community. Only if we are able to fulfill needs of those that are excluded by official architecture, our idea of academia and practice makes sense. Therefore, new methodologies and projects and works are imperative. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tonet and Raul, for this fantastic presentation. We had agreed that we will invite the people that were present in the previous panel to have a conversation. I think they're here. I can see at least Thanos and Eleni, but we can open up the floor to questions from the audience and from the online audience as well. So I don't know if we have any questions from here. Yes, Dimitris.
Hi all, thank you for the presentations. Were very informative, and I think that conclude the day very well, because in the afternoon we had this discussion about Greece and how the participatory processes move along here, and actually this is why Platon said about these things about failure, because and that is actually my question, because what we lack here, and I think that this is the difference between, for example, Spain or Portugal, that have, I think, a tradition of community involvement, a tradition of co-building different initiatives since 70s or 80s. And even the last decade, I mean, the Barcelona case, I think it's a case of many examples that people and architects and the neighborhoods co-design a lot of things. What interests me, and I would like your comment and some more clarification, is the links between the institutional. It's actually a similar question with Lucas, but because I had some experience with Barcelona during my PhD, the links about administration, social movements, and how all this move along since 2015, because as we know, 2015 was a break with Barcelona and Comú. As I know, José Bohigas from Arquitectos de Cabecera is also the director of Barcelona Regional, which is the major urban development corporation in the municipality. So how a collective that was used to work with the neighborhood and in academia moves to, or some members of the collective, to the office of the administration part, how this moves along, what is actually the situation the last 2-3 years, because as all administrations do, they become more tired as they move along. And I think that this is a very crucial part, because in Greece we have a situation where we move from, I'm not going to say from failure to failure, but we are a few steps behind in linking administration with participatory processes. But I think that the audience will be very interested, and of course I will be, to know how in cases that we have this link, what are the challenges, what is the opposition, because this is something very important to know about. And what's your comment about, because of course you know the case very well. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a question for Tonet to to answer. So what happens when you move freely between activism, academia, administration, then back to activism, and then...
Yes, well, I was interested to listen to Cristina or Raul maybe answering, right? Or maybe Tiago, who is also an in-between out and in-between inside. Anyway, yes, of course, there are many issues. Trying to answer to that. First is to get into an administration, which has a lot of inertia, which takes a long time to change things, and obviously trying to find the balance between what's realistic to be done and what social movements expect to do. I think that as Cristina has been explaining before, and as we have tried to explain also Raul and me, there are those movements that are becoming much more structural, policies that are becoming much more structural, and in this sense, we have done part of the work, though, as you can understand, there are many open questions, there are many critiques, and there's always a sensation that we don't go as far as we should have gone. In fact, I was there for 4 years, so I was there for the first mandate, and I'm now much more relaxed and happy on being back on the social movements and working along with the community, and not having to tackle with the administration daily. But that's of course a personal perception. Plus, Barcelona en Comú is not governing. Let's say it's a party of the government, but it's not doesn't have the majority or the total control of what's going on, and that of course makes things harder than what we thought. But I would say that in general, there's a clear evolution, and there are elements that have become stable, and we understand that even though, of course, the government could change in next year, not next year, in 2023, many of the policies, such as collective housing, such as the approach of participation, will remain because they are becoming much more, let's say, normalized and popular to people.
So because I heard talking about failure, I think it's a little bit also for me. Well, but I must say that well, this situation, it's bringing us a lot of issues concerning this idea of politics and our role as architects, or as an architectural cooperative in this case. Because we took a lot of, we focused a lot on discussion with the people there. For 2 years, it was not easy, everything that we discussed. And but even, for example, the neighbors association and landowners came inside of our cooperative. They are still part of our cooperative. But on one hand, you have a short period of time where you have this councillor of urbanism, which is clearly a kind of an idea of having someone that plan as in the times of fascism in Portugal. So the idea was clear to say they're very liberal with the rich people, with the funds, with investment funds, but very strong with the poor neighborhood. So he is to decide. It's the state has to decide everything, and without considering what is there. So, but that took us. Well, what was on the news was that he dismissed from the list because we had elections in last September, local elections, and he was put it away from the list because of the situation of Quinta do Ferro. And the party that was running lost elections. So it was center-left, and I'm doing this because it was, as you saw, I was referring to urbanism and I was referring to local development that always support our work. And when it arrives to urbanism, well, it's big money, it changed the situation. But what I really do think, and I want to believe in that, and I think it's the positive thing that I might have from this, is that you cannot think in a progressive government, local government, without having which is strongly based on popular neighborhoods. So that's the thing that I do feel that, and that's democracy. I feel in the cities we are always playing always playing in the classical way of class struggle that you can see here. For example, here for us it was quite interesting to see how landlords are working class and are people that really don't have money to renovate their houses, but they keep the rents also in €2 the rent of a house that had no conditions. But so everything was set up for them to sell, and then the funds will create the new neighborhood, and the people that were living there were gentrified around for conventional houses, and everything was set for a conventional process of reurbanizing that area. What I do feel is that, for example, the center-right party that won the election went there a lot of times, asked to be with us on the neighborhood a lot of times, and there were lots of people from the neighborhood that were part on the list for the center-right party. So because and in fact they grow up a lot on that district because of that. So I do believe that it has something. So if we want to do progressive policies, we always have to keep the connection with these popular neighborhoods.
Yeah, I wanted to emphasize this. Thank you, because I have the feeling that also talking about failures, in certain moment in Spain at the beginning of the dictatorship, it was a moment where like the trust and also some political leaderships or social leaderships that also took the power. No? So this was also discussion in our kind of environment and surroundings about which kind of role to take in front of the beginning of Barcelona en Comú. And we wanted to be kind of outside and have a kind of strong collaboration, but being by the side of the society and understanding that we can be proactive in terms of generating and being propositive, and understanding this moment as a moment to consolidate, to strengthen projects, as also Tonet said, to begin initiatives that cannot be easily dismantled and set up precedents. And we are always kind of thinking that a political change will come. So, and I think that this always is kind of relationship, no, and where to. Exactly. So, but interesting comment. Thanks.
Eleni and Thanos.
Thank you all for the great presentations today. It was really great to learn more about your work that I kind of already seen already. I have following kind of the question of Dimitris about failure. I have a more personal question. I think the work that you're doing is quite exciting, and I think all of us working in that space, we try to find ways to move between these different fields, between activism, between kind of practice and academia, and try to do these kinds of projects. But, you know, I think there's a constant struggle of how, as practitioners, do we stay kind of financially viable, right? Because these projects are not, they're not economically sustained. It has to come from a lot of different efforts. So I just wanted for you to maybe share some kind of personal experiences of how difficult it was to do those projects and how you kind of made them happen in a way.
Well, I can start by saying that this all started in Quinto do Ferro started by running into a fund, and in fact we already got for producing all the efforts, and I think around 100,000 euros to pay. That's one thing that is quite clear for us. We don't work for free. That's something that we always say to neighbors association that contact us, that the local partnerships. We start first to understand what is the problem, what are the questions. Then we start to try to get funds, different funds. In this case, we already worked with 100,000 euros, and now we have another fund that in Lisbon we are working with in 6 different neighborhoods, and we are being funded mostly for workers, for working to pay our wages. So mostly working with different grants, not funds, grants, more or less. Thank you.
In the case of Lacol, for example, I think that there is also kind of an evolution since almost 12 years. And of course, in the beginning, that some of us, it was still students, so it was kind of an activist involvement in the neighborhood and a strong personal of all of us dedication and kind of personal involvement as a neighbors. But and also we kind of all the co-founders start working progressively in the professional structure, also in order to not press too much, and also trying to allow the cooperative to have a kind of a direction and a kind of a projects, and but at the same time kind of combining this kind of private projects of like people of the family, friends, kind of a special kind of neighbors that ask, because we were in the ground floor and neighbors just ask for technical kind of projects with this participatory process or projects with administration, but always with a kind of a balance, like around at least 20%, for example. And when we started like the intercooperation and being more and more active with the social economy and with the generation of this kind of projects such as cooperative housing, these are projects that are having economical structure, and as the same way they pay for economic assistance and consultancy, they pay for an architect. So nowadays we said that we are always having a balance between non-paid and paid work, but we are around the 70% of our time is dedicated to paid projects that basically are from social economy sector and small scale, as I was saying, private and public. But nowadays I would say that almost the 80% of the work that we are currently doing is by cooperatives in different ways, but of course has been kind of a long way, and in also specific moments with grants or kind of to do kind of research with housing policies, but it's not that much in our case, kind of really small. Of course, now we are also trying to apply for some kind of European projects. We are like implementing energy communities and working also with engineers and other cooperatives. So there are some kind of fields that we think that they are kind of crucial for the urban challenges that we are trying to move, but always with kind of generating cooperative projects. That is something that is interesting for us. But always there is also kind of a contradiction about kind of the decent work and trying to have kind of goals that allow the sustainability of us as professionals, and it's always really challenging. No, we are on the way to that.
That's, I guess, always the big question, right, that comes at the beginning. In the case of Arquitectos de Cabecera, it's run by voluntarism or activism, or we do it because we believe in that. I mean, you can call it as you want. Even though we are based in the university, we don't receive any kind of funding from the public university, which it's not in a very good economic condition, except for part-time low-wage contracts. So we don't have a space, we don't have funding, then don't provide us for anything else rather than that. Now, for this refurbishment attention office, we received a grant from the municipality. I think that's key when we were talking before about the interrelationship between public and cooperative, or public and associations, because in this case, funding comes from the municipality. It's not as high as it should be, but it's self-managed. So they provide funding, but they don't dictate the agenda. And I think that's quite crucial for these kind of initiatives, many of which we were discussed in previous sessions.
Thanos, do you want to? Yeah. And James, I think it's. I don't know if you want to say something about this question. I have something else also to ask you myself. So.
I mean, I could say quickly, you know, I collaborate with Rotor and I'm vaguely aware of, you know, how they operate. And, you know, the fortunate thing in the world of reuse is that you can combine the kind of antique aspect and the aura aspect, and that's the aspect that's more economical at the moment, and you can combine that with the work that's more research oriented or more oriented towards salvaging materials that are not so well loved and don't have so much value in the market. So interior design projects for high-end customers can subsidize a lot of the activity, and you know, grants and subsidies can do a lot more. But yeah, Rotor, I think, is quite ruthless in only taking on stock that they really believe that they can sell. But of course, the margins are always very thin.
Thank you, James. I would like to ask a question to all of you, but we can start with something that James presented, and then I think it was visible in all presentations, which is the importance and the value of the case study and also of the pilot project, right? So we tend to, at least this was also something that happened in the previous session, but I think it is common in many conversations about participatory design. We tend to look on the big picture. So how do we change the entire system of governance to allow for this projects to happen, or how do we change, you know, the entire logistic cycle in order to think about, you know, new material technologies in construction? And I think for me, the also radical and political take on participation and also on, let's say, challenging architectural practice in this context is the idea that we can start from something really small, from a very, very small project, or from like visiting a specific site, or by developing one website. And I think, to me, that's something that is also really valuable in the context or in the phase that Greece is now moving. And, you know, I think the value of these conversations that we're having here is also to think about, you know, not only how to change the kind of wider framework, but also how to look into very, very strategic interventions, small, large, extra large, doesn't matter, but how we can be basically more opportunistic. For me, that's the question, actually, right? What makes, and I think, you know, politics are always opportunistic. I mean, that's the definition of what political struggle, even class struggle is, right? I mean, you have to, you know, you fight for the wage. You don't fight. It's almost like a pagan confrontation. It's about, you know, very, very simple things. So, you know, starting from James, you know, how do you frame your teaching and your practice in relation to case studies and pilot projects and interventions? And then, you know, we can discuss it across the table.
Yeah, I mean, it obviously depends greatly on what the students are focusing on, but a typical critique that they might receive at juries is, how do you scale this activity, and like, does it make an impact? You know, can it make a dent in carbon emissions, what you're doing? And we always counter with the fact that, you know, just one iteration already has this value embedded in it, a social value that cannot be quantified in that way. So yeah, we really defend and fight for the value of kind of the one, the one case study, the one small project. At the same time, of course, we do push ourselves to see if scale can be economical. But I don't think it certainly doesn't invalidate an exercise if it's not. And then, yeah, we really always look at the systemic side as well, the policy side. We try to talk to policymakers, building contractors who, you know, developers who have kind of very little time for this stuff. So at the same time as these, you know, small, very bounded activities, we're trying to make strategic interventions at a higher scale as well. or at a higher level.
Great, thank you, James. I don't know if Tonet wants to say something. I mean, the first time I spoke with Tonet was within the framework of the Center for Social Innovation, and I think one of the first presentations he ever made was about the value of pilot projects in radicalizing and rethinking urban transformation. So I don't know if you want to say something about it, Tonet.
Yeah, of course. Well, I think that same as we talk about business as usual projects, there's something like society as usual projects, let's say, right? So why do these pilots become important? Well, because it's not because they are opportunists, Platon, but because they raise opportunities. Because in these processes, new opportunities that were hidden or that nobody was believing in them because they were not happening can happen, right? And as I said before, somehow they become structural. I think that as Cristina was explaining, collective housing, right, or the rights of tenants or rent controls, right, have become something normal in the debate. Or we have changed the refurbishment policies. We can do what we're doing in the last neighborhood we were talking about because there's an official line understanding that refurbishment should go to where it's needed, right, not only where people are claiming for it. And there have to be different ways of giving that public subsidies and that public help to get to where the refurbishment is really needed. So I think that of course we're still doing architecture, and we as Raul has explained it very well, we tend to work a lot on the subject as a site, right? So it's not really that we scale in an industrial way in repeating the same, right? But we are somehow like creating procedures, examples that are being repeated, right? That through academia can be explained to more people, can change sensibilities, and we are starting to see more and more groups of people that are applying, right, these participatory processes, starting from an education where when we studied the older members of Arquitectos de Cabecera, where that didn't exist, right? Where architecture was not about the subject desires because the subject was someone a typical person who wouldn't ask for nothing at all. So I don't know. I would insist on this idea of changing procedures is creating opportunities or making needs visible that allow to change the way that we do projects, the way that we work along with communities.
Thank you, Tonet.
No, I just wanted to say that for us it's also really important. And yesterday it was also really nice to see how also even for the municipalities, they said people experience temporary uses and engage people as a kind of 3 strategies really used by implementing kind of changes. So for us it's also essential. And I would just say that it's really important the step kind of forward, like being really critical, the analysis, the systematization of the knowledge, the share of the knowledge, that's something that like a kind of a toolbox, or how we can kind of set us kind of a conclusions. So for us, and always kind of evolving, kind of this idea of variations of the prototype. So not like kind of stick with one that you can be replicable exactly. So this idea of always evolving, it's something that is essential. But yeah, just this idea of sharing the knowledge for us is kind of, after the prototype, it's really important as a way of commoning, this kind of the experiences.
Well, following Chris' ideas, I'd say that it's the as much, well, we have sharing this the know-how. It's an issue, and it's and becoming it public. So that's a thing that you have to work on. And sometimes we have, for example, we have something that we are we want to, when we are on the news for something, we want that this is not just for the good architects that are doing something, but it's something we have. We always try to have a political issue when we try to be mediatic in certain cases. Sometimes it runs well, sometimes it runs bad, but this is about disputing the power, I think. So, and following what Tonet was saying, I think we, in a certain way, we have to dispute all levels of decisions. So at a certain point, well, 10 years ago, we were mostly working in grassroots and with local associations in different villages and different communities. But at a certain point, we also decide, come on, we have to scale. And to scale, it's also to participate on politics. It's not saying that we are being candidates. It's saying that we, at a certain point, apply to the parliament, national parliament, saying we want to talk about 3 neighborhoods, to the Council of Housing. On that time, it was called like that. And we had a meeting with all the MPs of different parties, and we show different cases with simple laws that could solve problems on different neighborhoods. And it ran quite well. We started to be, we played a role as the cooperative. We played a role in the production of the law of housing, the national law of housing that we discussed, and our opinion was heard. But that's always, of course, and when we are too much there, we also get in the grassroots. So that, because that's the thing that it's more, because in the end, what we want to do it, as all architects want, it's in a certain way to change, to get better people's life. So and in a certain way, when we get to dispute to the parliament, or to talk with the Secretary of State or whatever, we go there mostly to try to make them conscious on what is passing, and how can reality could be changed. Of course, sometimes it's cooperating, sometimes it's also resisting. It's also a matter of this game of the rope, and I'm not talking about Squid Game. I think I already talked about it, but it's a little bit. That's what I feel. For example, in Quinta do Ferro, I'm here now, in a moment where we are losing. We are not winning, clearly. But with the change of the local government, even though center right, I do presume that something might change in the next couple of months. But I think that's a kind of, we have to dispute all levels of decision or power, not power but decision.
Very briefly. I think you touch upon a very important issue, which is how the disciplinary shift affected that we don't talk anymore about a general theory of urbanization as we used to, but we discuss about how some very small examples can make a difference. So in order to scale up, I think it's not anymore about printing plans and sending them, or making like, even the process is not replicable, but I think the tools, and then adapted to the very specificities.
Great. That's a really great way to conclude this panel. I would like to thank you all for these amazing presentations. It was great to see you in person and virtually. Good night, everyone, and thank you for attending the conference. We're going to see you tomorrow starting at 10 a.m., all right? Great. Bye, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Bye, Tonet.